Between March 1942 and Feb 43, a minimum of 3 million Jews were killed, 11 months, Nazi, speed and secrecy, the two watchwords. The speed is obvious. As for secrecy, well, two can keep a secret if one is dead, maybe killed by a Nazi, or Hamas. Ultra and Enigma, keepers of secrets, wartime codes, were these speakers for the dead, then, spitting out Nazi mysteries, both secret and profane. By the latter part of 1941, mass shootings, Jew murder, were well known. 7,000 in such and such a meadow, 30,000 by such and such a railroad siding, 100 Jews here, 4,000 there. On August 24, 1941, Churchill broadcast that whole districts are being exterminated. Scores of thousands, literally scores of thousands of executions in cold blood are being perpetrated by the German police troops upon the Russian patriots who defend their native soil. Since the Mongol invasion of Europe in the 16th century, there has never been methodical, merciless butchery on such a scale, or approaching such a scale. We are in the presence of a crime without a name. It had a name, though, in German. Aktion Reinhard. Pardon my accent. To broadcast details would have tipped off the Nazis to the fact that their code was broken. The Jews died, murdered, in a sort of silence. To the Jewish Chronicle on November 14, Churchill was slightly less circumspect. None has suffered more cruelly than the Jew. The unspeakable evils wrought on the bodies and spirits of men by Hitler and his vile regime. That newspaper, Jewish Chronicle, was more specific, reporting in January 42 that 52,000 Jews had been killed in Kiev. In February, that 18,000 had been killed in Poltava and 15,000 in Borisov. In April, that 1,200 had been killed in KZ concentration camp Mauthausen by poison gas. The Polish government in exile was aware in May 1942 of the methods and efficiencies of the Nazis. In June, the Jewish Chronicle wrote that news is filtering through of recent ghastly massacres of Jews in Nazi Europe. Some 85,000 men, women, and children are mentioned in a report to hand. The London Daily Telegraph reported that the Germans were planning to murder all Jews, detailing the use of mobile gas chambers. The Jewish Chronicle commented that the hideous details read like tales from the imagination of some drug-maddened creature seeking to portray a nightmare of evil. The average mind simply cannot believe the reality of such sickening revelations, or that men, even the vilest and most bestial, could be found to perpetrate such disgusting orgies of sadistic mania. Only such florid writing was thought able to communicate the horror. That, or silence, but you can't see silence in print. The United States Office of Strategic Services knew at that same time, late 1942, that Germany is no longer persecuting the Jews. It is systematically exterminating them. A British officer who escaped and hid in the Warsaw Ghetto reported that Himmler said that the Jews were not disappearing fast enough to please the Fuhrer. The Jews were to be virtually exterminated by a specific date. Preliminary attempts to meet the schedule resulted in Polish farms being abandoned because the stench was unbearable of mass machine gun victims left unburied. By November, the New York Times reported the existence of Treblinka and Auschwitz extermination camps, estimating that 2 million Jews were already murdered, shot, starved, gassed, electrocuted, clubbed. Shmuel Ziegelbaum, another Jewish member of the Polish National Council in London, said, "It will be a disgrace to go on living, to belong to the human race, unless immediate steps are taken to put a stop to this crime, the greatest that history has known." Said Leon Feiner of the Jewish Bund, "Let not a single leader of the United Nations be able to say that they did not know that we were being murdered in Poland." Anthony Eden, British Foreign Secretary, told his ambassador in Washington that he had little doubt that a policy of gradual extermination of all Jews, except for highly skilled workers, is being carried out by the German authorities. Little doubt, he said, because some doubt is almost inevitable in the face of the impossible. Thus, in August 1943, Roger Allen of the British Foreign Office wrote to the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee that it is true that there have been references to the use of gas chambers in other reports, but these references have usually, if not always, been equally vague, and since they have concerned the extermination of Jews, have usually emanated from Jewish sources. These stories may or may not be true, but in any event, I submit we are putting out a statement on evidence which is far from conclusive and which we have no means of assessing. That's one Roger Allen, diplomat, a man with a fine feel for the weight of evidence. Likewise, that Joint Intelligence Committee chairman. In my opinion, it is incorrect to describe Polish information regarding German atrocities as trustworthy. The Poles, and to a far greater extent the Jews, tend to exaggerate German atrocities in order to stoke us up. They seem to have succeeded. I do not believe that there is any evidence which would be accepted in a court of law that Polish children have been killed on the spot by Germans when their parents were being deported. As regards putting Poles to death in gas chambers, I do not believe that there is any evidence that this has been done. That man, he'll be dead by now. But he must have been a man with a niggling demand for proof and a perfectly symmetrical mustache. The U.S. State Department was infested, as usual, with anti-Semitism, which took the form of indifference, actually stonewalling efforts to save lives. Breckinridge Long, head of U.S. refugee policy, wrote in an internal State Department memorandum in June 1940, after persecution and war had already started in Europe, quote, "We can delay and effectively stop for a period of indefinite length the number of immigrants into the United States. We could do this by simply advising our consuls to put every obstacle in the way and to resort to various administrative devices which would postpone and postpone and postpone the granting of the visas." Historical irony. There used to be real, actual refugees from persecution and eventually from real genocide. Not just self-seeking illegals lying and taking and flooding our theoretical border, not leftist-backed insurrectionists flinging the word genocide the way monkeys fling feces. U.S. opinion polls taken throughout World War II showed that only Japanese and Germans were considered a greater threat to America than the Jews. Good job with that propaganda, anti-Semites. And you're still at it. Even better. Americans are indeed stupid. Hamas, morons, is a terrorist organization. After the Nazi camps were opened to the newsreels and the films were seen in movie houses, the Times of London pondered about whether such displays were in good taste. The BBC called its correspondence report from the Majdanek camp a propaganda stunt and refused to broadcast it. So then, fact and fiction. The edges blur, whether as by blood that obscures the clarity of some formerly sharp image, or something more innocuous. The question always lingers: how are we to know? Today, the world screams, just as it always has. Fascism is reinvigorated under a new name, Islamism, currently Hamas. But we need not look to movements to find atrocity. Campus protesters led by Soros-funded apparatchiks, that's recruitment and training. George Soros, as destructive as leaded gasoline. He hates Israel the way hairspray hated the ozone layer, indirectly and in effect. The human soul is itself an abomination. A dark judgment, yes, but take up your objections with God, in whose image we were made, but which common practice continually desecrates. How do we repair it? The world, the people in it, their willingness to disbelieve or to watch or to do evil. Jesus asked a crippled man, "Do you want to be healed?" Very common answer would be, yeah, but what's the catch? My answer, always, is that you have to be rational. Evidence depends on testimony, a lot. There was a lot of testimony with the genocide. There were not any actual newsreels until it was far too late. Name-calling and slogan chanting and tearful feelings, these are not evidence. There are still 129 innocent music festival-going hostages, for more just random snatches, still being held by the terrorist organization Hamas. Children, if you want to protest, sponsor a music festival, but have really good security.